I was waiting for the beep. Are we good? Okay. This is a new camera, the new camera edition of the Daf Yomi. And so thank you very much to our camera sponsors and the people who put effort into being able to acquire this new device. It should serve us well. The Daf Yomi is sponsored for the month by Michael Tza'idi for Hatzlacha with making Aliyah, and in honor of his late father, Zohar Ben Ruvain. Zichron Vracha. And Daf Yomi for the month is also sponsored by Moshe and Susie Feder, Lili Nishmas, Mr. Feder's father, Aryeh Ben Michal, whose yortzeit was on the 15th of Elul. And Lili Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's mother, Roiza Bas Simcha Cohen, whose yortzeit was on the 18th of Elul, and may their Nishmas have an Aliyah. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Moshe, Dr. Moshe, and Moshe and Ruth Greenbaum. He'll be Dr. He's not here. In gratitude to me. Thank you. You're welcome. You're very welcome. And to Jeff Wald for their commitment to the shir. Hashem should give us the zechus to Messiah Seder Zevachim. Here's Hashem. What we were discussing, the big question that was eluding me as we were sitting here was, can you add another of mitzvahs aseh onto your korban olah? Right? Your korban olah is designated, and now you did another avera. Can you add more things to that olah that already exists? Right? And so we were discussing, of course you can, we said, because how could you explain why we have two, what's the purpose of the two offerings that are brought by, the two goat offerings that are brought by Shavuos? And we know that they atone for somebody who is impure coming into the Beis HaMikdash, as we remember from Masechah Shavuos, or some of us had blacked that out, but those were the days. And we know that's what that korban was for. Well, if we already atoned for it once, why do we have two of them? And so they answered, well, it could be that they atoned and then they went back and separated it out a second one. So it doesn't really prove our point. We said that really, we're shaking our heads at that answer. That answer is not great because the pasuk doesn't say anything about needing to wait to separate. It sounds like you had the two of them together. They were being brought one right after the other. And okay, so we said, the korbanos of the community were different because Beis Din makes conditions on them. In other words, Beis Din doesn't establish the offering as an offering until immediately before it's going to be slaughtered in order to avoid problems, right? In order to avoid, it's actually a good practice anyway. If you have your own personal sacrifice and you don't know, like something could happen to the animal on the way, right? It's best not to consecrate your animal until you get to the Beis HaMikdash right before you're going to bring it. Anyway, that's how they did it. And so that we were proving, the last thing that we had said was Rav Yosef, the son of Shmuel, said to Rav Papa, right, that it seems that Rabbi Shimon does not agree to this concept of leiv Beis Din masna, is what we called it, that Beis Din can make conditions, because he says, if you've got korban tamid at the end of the year, and now you've got these leftover ones, right? So they don't need to be redeemed. Right? We don't need to, they're not allowed to be redeemed if they are purified. Now, if Beis Din had made this condition, then redeeming them, even if they're purified, redeeming them even if they have no blemishes, implies that Beis Din has not consecrated them. They were holding on till the very end. The fact that you couldn't redeem them means that Beis Din was not holding on. So that seems to imply that Beis Din was not holding on. So that's not the right answer. And now we're up to Ve'od, second line. And furthermore, Habai mine Reb Yirmiyah mireb Zera. Reb Yirmiyah asked Reb Zera the question, Sirei atzeres shekibel daman b'shnei kosos. Let's say you have these two goats of the Shavuos offerings, and you have caught the blood in two utensils. V'nizrak damol shel rishon, sheni lamahu ba. So he says, what is the purpose? You've sprinkled the blood for the first one. Now you're going back and sprinkling the second one. What's the point of that? Which was our question. And we had answered it before for the tuma that happened in between. No, that's not the reason why. He says, Al tuma she'or'a bein zrika shel zeh lezeh. He says that it's for the tuma that occurred between the sprinkling of this one and the sprinkling of the other one. Now, the reason this is critical is that this is already after the shechita. The slaughtering has already taken place. We said we were worried about whether you can add on an avera or not add on an aseh that you didn't do after your korban was already set up. But we had always presumed that that was only up to the shechita, except for Moshe, who said, well, maybe Zrika is mechaper, and maybe you can wait all the way up to the Zrika. And I said, hang on, because that's coming. So here it is, right? It seems to be that the cutoff is Zrika, not shechita, in any event. So ad kan lo mi boy. Ad kan lo mi boile ela ase de la'achar shchita, aval ase de la'achar frasha lo kami boile. The question that they seem to be asking is, can you add a positive commandment after the shchita is done? Because the korban has already been slaughtered, but the sprinkling, which atones, has not been done. That's where the questionable zone was. The questionable zone is between slaughtering and sprinkling. The questionable zone is not between separating and slaughtering. Clearly, you can add on. Nobody seems to have a problem or a concern about adding another asay to your korban after it's been separated before it's been slaughtered. So maybe they say, well, maybe imtim salomar kamar. Maybe saying, well, if you're going to say, meaning, we might also have a concern that you can't add another thing onto it after it's been separated. But if you say that you could add something on after it's been separated, what about after shchita? Can you also add on after that? So, however, the point is that it is unclear at the conclusion, right, whether you can add on anything afterwards or not, right? Because we have different ways of explaining what we have just learned.
After, are you saying hafrasha? Even after
the hafrasha doesn't seem to have, right? Doesn't seem to have
been answered.
Made a conclusion, right? Let's right. So it says okay. So okay. So yeah. So we don't know that. Okay, so now, Itmar. Let's go back to this issue that the Gemara was talking about changing the Kedusha of the animal from one Kedusha to another. Okay? Toda sheshachta l'shem todas chavero. Let's say somebody's got a korban toda, and it was slaughtered for the sake of a friend's korban toda. So that's kshera, that's going to still be kosher. Rabba Amar's kshera, Rav is going to say it's kosher. And Rav Chisda Amar psula, Rav Chisda says that it is puzzle. Now, Rabba Amar kshera, Rabba says it's kosher because he says toda l'shem toda nishchata. You've got a toda, you sacrificed it as a toda, so therefore it should work, right? You didn't change anything, right? Rav Chisda Amar, Rav Chisda says psula, he says that it is puzzle. L'shum shlomim didei nishchata ba'inon. Right? We need that it is yours, right? That you changed people here, right? There's some kind of an adjustment, right? It says zevach todas shlomav in the pasuk. It has to be yours. So therefore, if you make this shchita of a korban toda for somebody else, we're going to consider this a shinui kodesh, meaning, even though we're not really calling this shinui balim is only when you slaughter it for the sake of sprinkling it for somebody else. This is actually slaughtering it for the sake of a korban of somebody else. What you're doing, though, is that's a shinui kodesh, because you're changing it from todas Ruvain to todas Shimon, which are two different korbanos. That's how we're looking.
This still says it's puzzle, which doesn't sound like our Mishnah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So we said when we're saying psula, we're saying it's puzzle for the person being brought, but it's still kosher as an offering, right? So therefore, it's consistent with our Mishnah. That's a good point, right? We'll bring that up, right? Our Mishnah says that it is, right? He says, where does he quote that from? I think he just quotes it. I think it's Rashi, but that it is only invalid for Ruvain, but as an offering, you still bring it.
Why is it only invalid for Ruvain?
Because we said that if you change the korban from one type of korban to another type, then it's invalid for the original owner. Okay, so that's their argument. Ruvain can still be effective for Ruvain or not? Okay, so now, Amar Rabbah. So Rabbah says, Mina aminallah. Where's my proof, right? That if you shecht for the sake of a toda, that's not considered to be a shinui of kodesh. That's not changing it. We're doing it for Ruvain's toda, and it's for Shimon's toda. It's also for toda. It works. So the Tanya, my source is a brisa. The brisa says, "Ubasar zevach todas shlamav biyom hakrivo es zivcho." Pasuk says, and the meat of the slaughtered of the korban toda of his shlamim, the day that it is offered for his sacrifice. So, Abba Chanin Amar Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. So Abba Chanin says the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Ba Lilamed Toda Sheshachta L'Shem Shlamim Kshera. This comes to tell me what we had learned before, that if you take a Toda and you change it to a Shlamim, that's kosher. Shlamim Shenishchatu L'Shem Toda Psulim. A Shlamim which is slaughtered for the sake of a Toda is pasul, because not every Shlamim is a Toda. Ma Hefresh Bein Zeh Lezeh. What's the difference between the two? Why would one work and the other one not? Because Toda Kruya Shlamim. Toda is called a type of Shlamim. Ve'ein Shlamim Kruyan Toda. But a Shlamim is not called a Toda. Right? Not every Shlamim, there's many types of Shlamims. Toda is always a Shlamim. But not every Shlamim is a Toda. Okay?
That makes sense.
Huh?
How does that make sense?
Because if you think about it, right? Every Macintosh is an apple, but not every apple is a Macintosh. Right?
Yep.
That's how that always works, right? One is a subcategory of the other. Shlamim l'shem toda psula. So a shlamim, which is for the sake of a toda, is pasul. Ha toda l'shem toda kshera. That means the brisa is implying that if the toda was for another toda, it would be kosher. My lav de chavrei. So don't we mean that even if he switched it and brought it for his friend? Lo didei. No, that's not what this brisa means. This brisa means that he brings it as his own. Aval de chavrei, what would be the rule by his friend? That would be psula. So, okay, well, adatani.
What would it mean, Toda L'Shem Toda, for yourself?
Meaning that you're bringing it absolutely correctly, right? You're bringing a toda for you, for yourself. So obviously, that seems like that obviously would be kosher, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they're going. I think that's the next question. Adatani shlamim l'shem toda psula. But then what the brisa says, that since a shlamim for the sake of a toda is pasul, leisnei toda l'shem toda, v'kol shekin shlamim l'shem toda. Why, if switching the toda from one person to another person would invalidate it, why would you bother to have to get to the case of a shlamim for the sake of a toda? The toda itself, there's a case where a toda for a toda is no good. So then for sure, toda for the sake of a shlamim is no good. Shlamim l'shem toda didei itzrich le. No, the answer is because I also know that if I take a shlamim for the sake of a toda of himself, that's what the point is. Salka daitach, I would have thought to have said, mida toda kruya shlamim shlamim naami kruyan toda. That the Mishnah's main point is that they're interchangeable. Todas and shlamim are interchangeable. So therefore, switching from a toda to a shlamim is okay. You might think that shlamim to shlamim to a toda is also okay. So no, you can't. V'chishachit lehu l'shem toda lichshuru. So if you slaughter your shlamim for the sake of a toda, it will be kosher. Kamashmon. So that's what it's coming to tell me. Only a toda for the sake of a toda is kosher, not a shlamim for the sake of a toda, even though it's all his own sacrifice. So there really is a chiddush to that, right? Even because you're right, obviously toda for yourself is also, but it's to exclude the other where you took a shlamim and changed it to your own toda, which would be no good. Okay, so that's Rabbi is looking at it from this brisa, but again, not necessarily conclusive from this brisa. Amar Rava says, Chatas sheshachta l'shem chatos, kshera l'shem ola psula. If you have a chatos, right? We said if you have a korban chatos and you slaughter it for the sake of any other animal, for any other korban, that's pasul for everybody, right? Completely pasul. So let's say he has a chatos for the sake of another person's chatos. That is kosher.
What's the punishment for you setting a pasul korban?
What's the punishment for bringing a pasul korban?
Yeah.
It depends on which part. We had talked about, I don't know, is it kari? Is it lo saseh? Let's assume it's at least a lo saseh at this point. So that would be malchus, but we'll see. Maybe misa. I don't know. The answer, I don't know. We'll have to see as we get to later on where we bring the parts where we talk about not being able to bring a pasul korban and what the punishments are. So let's say you have a chatos that you shacht it for the sake of a chatos, then that's kosher. L'shem ola psula. If you change your chatos to an ola, that's pasul. My taima. What is the reason for that? Because v'shachat osa lechatos, Amar Rachman, the pasuk says you have to slaughter your chatos as a chatos. V'arei chatos l'shem chatos nishchata. So if I slaughter a chatos for the sake of a different chatos, right? For example, guy eats both chalev and blood. He eats forbidden fats and blood. So he slaughters his chatos, which he thought was for chelev, and he slaughters it for the blood. It's kosher, even though he switched it, and it works, right? It should work because it's the same korban, same owner, so it should be effective, right? Even though you switched averos on it. So therefore, this pasuk says, the Torah says, achatos for achatos is okay. L'shem olah psula, but if he does shecht it for the sake of an olah, that's where there would be a problem. That's where it would be no good. That would be shinoi kodesh, and your korban chatos becomes invalid. Okay, v'amar Rava. Rava says, chatos sheshachta ami shemechuyev chatos psula. Now, let's say you're changing, you do a shchita for a korban chatos, and you do the shchita for another person to make another person get atonement. So now we're doing shini ba'alam again, and you're shechting it for another person, and that person also did an avera. If that's the case, then you've invalidated the offering because you've changed owners. Al mi shemechuyev olah k'sheira. But if you're shechting Ruvain's korban chatos for the sake of Shimon, who doesn't need to bring a korban chatos, he's standing there waiting to bring a korban olah, that does not invalidate your chatos. Why? Because Shimon is an irrelevant person. He doesn't. The only way that Shimon can become relevant is for him to also be somebody waiting to bring a chatos. If he doesn't need to bring a chatos, shechting it for him is like nothing. That's like that he hasn't done anything. You need a person who is liable to a chatos in order for there to be a change of owners. My timer, what's the reason why that is? Because that seems a little bit, right? Crazy, exactly. My timer, v'chaper alav. It should atone for him. Alav v'lo al chavero. It needs to be a korban chatos has to be an atonement for him, not for his friend. Chavera dum yedidei. But whenever we have a pasuk comparing two things, a person and another person, we're going to say that they have to be similar. B'mechuyev kapara kamoso. The only way for his friend to invalidate his sacrifice for him is for him to be a friend who also is similar to him in that he also has a korban chatos to bring. If your friend does not have a korban chatos to bring and he's bringing something else, he can't invalidate your sacrifice with this invalid intent. Okay, so these are the rules. Okay,
obey for them.
Gzeres hakosiv, as we say, right? These are all just reading the psukim and coming to conclusions as to what is prohibited and what is not. Okay, so by a korban chatos, that's the rule now. Chatos for a chatos, toda for a toda, right? So that is going. We said we can't change. We right. That was our machlokas if you change toda for another person's toda, but chatos for a chatos. If that person owes a chatos, it'll invalidate. If he doesn't owe a chatos, it does not. V'amar Rava says chatos sheshachta ami she'ena mechuyev klum. Let's say I have a korban chatos and I shecht it for somebody who isn't chayav anything. So that's psula. That's already not that. Then that ruins it. So we said, right, again, remember, if the guy is chayav, Shimon is chayav chatos, that's going to ruin the sacrifice. If he's chayav an olah, that doesn't ruin the sacrifice. If he's not liable to anything, it's going to ruin the sacrifice. Okay? So if that didn't bother before, it should bother you some more now. Why? There's somebody out there that, everybody's done something. Nobody's perfect. So therefore, everybody's at least done some positive commandment, and therefore, chatos will atone for you. Chatos is an offering of atonement. Now, if you've already separated off your olah is already taking care of that positive commandment, so that's not going to be your issue. But if you have a person who hasn't separated off, or he's not bringing any sacrifice, he must have some issue. There's something in his closet that he's got here. Something's wrong with he's got something, so therefore, that offering is going to atone for whatever that sin he has. Rava says, chatos mechaperes al chayve aseh, which means, he says, that a korban chatos, not only does it atone for negative commandments, it can atone for positive commandment as well. It has to, otherwise what would be the problem here? So, we don't bring a korban chatos for a positive commandment, but if you've got positive commandment, let's say you did a negative commandment, and you also have some more positive commandments you also want to do tshuva for, you don't have to bring a second olah with your korban chatos. Your one korban chatos can take care of your negative plus all of your positives, right? Why mikal v'chomer? Because there's a kal v'chomer. Al chayve krisos mechaperes. If you have a avera that you've done, that if you had done it on purpose, you would be chayav kares. Al chayve aseh lo kol sheken. If you do something less, like a positive command, for sure chatos should atone. Chatos is a very powerful atoning offering. Therefore, for sure, it should cover you. Lememra debas mino he, which means, right, that this type of avera, that this type of guy who has a positive commandment is of the similar type of person as the person bringing the korban chatos. Because we said, in order to invalidate the korban chatos, the second person, Shimon, has to be similar to Ruvain. V'amar Rava says, chatos sheshachta amisha mechuyev chatos psula, amisha mechuyev ola keshera. But 1 second, if somebody has a positive commandment and he brought a korban ola, you just said that you can't bring, that the fact that Shimon has an ola to bring doesn't invalidate the korban chatos, because an ola is different than a chatos.
It's a constant contradiction.
It's a contradiction. So, therefore, mikiva lo mechaper, mikufyu mechaper. The answer is as an official atonement, it isn't an official atonement. As a floating sort of ephemeral sort of atonement, that a chatos is. Meaning, once the guy separates off his korban ola, that atonement, that's the set atonement for his ases. He's in a different category. This guy who owes a chatos, this guy who owes an ola, they're different. When a guy hasn't separated off anything and he's just in need for general atonement, he's a guy in need of atonement. Therefore, he could mess up somebody else's korban chatos as a guy who needs atonement. Okay, v'amar Rava. Rava says, Ola sheshachta shalo lishma. Let's say you have a korban ola, and you shecht it not for its own sake. Aser lizrok dama shalo lishma. You're not allowed, as we said on the first page, right? You can't go ahead and keep sprinkling the blood not for an ola. Either from a pasuk, as we've learned this before, either it was a pasuk or is logical. There was a pasuk, motzi svasecha tishmor. We said it was from the pasuk. You have to guard and do whatever you said you were going to do. So you have to finish this offering as you stated it. Or else we said it was logical. Mishum deshani ba kidajarish pirk, like we said before at the beginning of the parak. We're just bringing this because it's the right place for it, right? We said toda for toda, you can't change, chatos for chatos. So now we're talking about ola switching. So, right, as we said, just because you messed up a little doesn't mean you can continue to mess the rest of it up.
We're just saying all the ravas here.
Yes, and that's the thing also, Amar Ravas. V'amar Rava. Here we go, continuing. Ola haba le'achar misa. Let's say I have a korban ola, person who is supposed to bring it dies. So now his heirs are bringing it. Shachta b'shinui kodesh. If you change it from an ola to a different korban, that's psula. That's going to invalidate the offering. However, Beishinui Balim Kshera, but if you change the owner, that is not going to ruin it. Why? Dein Balim Lacharmisa.
Don't you originally say we're not allowed to change owners to the korban?
That's what he said. But it's not a problem, says Rava, after the original owner died. The person who's bringing it now is the heirs. He's not the original owner anyway. So changing it from the heirs to another person, you're not really changing it from its original owner.
Shouldn't you be keeping it within the same household?
You should. But it doesn't invalidate the offering, right? V'Rav Pinchas.
Well, why is it? There's Shinui Kodesh. Why is it puzzle?
Because Shinui Kodesh is because the pasuk tells us, puzzle for the owner, right? Puzzle for the owner means you got to bring another one. I don't think it means puzzle as not a korban. Let's see if I'm right.
You're always right, but that's what it says.
Shachli Shinui Kodesh psula. Me'alos, he says, me'alos chovas habalim, right? It doesn't work for the owners, right? That's Rashi, okay? So, right, Rashi says, lo also, v'tzarech hayorish lo havi acheres, the heir has to bring another one, right? That's what it means, okay? I know we use this puzzle, we do switch and say puzzle doesn't mean puzzle here. Puzzle means for that person. Should clarify what I'm saying. For Rav Pinchas Brei Rav Ami, Amar Rav Pinchas the son of Rav Ami says, Yesh Balim Lachar Misa. He says, no. An owner, once the heirs inherit it, they're the owners. So you can't change those owners and get away with it. He disagrees with Rava. Amar li Rav Ashi Rav Pinchas. Rav Ashi says Rav Pinchas Brei Rav Ami. Dafka Kamar Mar Yesh Balim Lachar Misa Uboy Lasuye Ola Achrisi. When you're saying that there are owners, do you mean no, he's really the owner. Like he inherited it, and he's the guy. And so therefore you got to bring another korban. Or dilma di'ika kama ase gabe mechapra. So he says, or are you suggesting that if he's got lots of positive commandments to be able to bring this korban ola for? You're not talking about the Shinei Balim, you're just saying that the heirs actually can use this sacrifice now as coverage for any positive commandments they didn't do, right? Because they're bringing a korban ola anyway. Or we're saying you're just saying, don't think it's not your sacrifice at all. You can't do anything with it. It does. The heirs can use it. So which do you mean? So Amarle Dafka community says, no, I mean it's really theirs, which means that if they do it shelo lishma, they have to bring that shelo lishim balim, they do shini balim, then it's not going to be effective. Rava says, Ola doron hi. So, an Ola is a present to Hashem, right? We bring that korban Ola, it's a present. That's how I have to look at it. Heichi dami. So, what are we talking about? How does it work, right? I deleka tshuva. How does this tshuva process for korban ola work, right? You're bringing a present to Hashem, get close to Hashem, as part of your tshuva process for not doing a positive commandment. So how is it working? I deleka tshuva. This is our tshuva since, right, we're up to Yom Kippur stuff, right? So if you have not done tshuva, so zevach rishoim to'eva, then you've got a wicked person's korban, and Hashem considers a wicked person's korban a disgrace. That would be, yes. So you got to do that first before you do your al-chetz, and then bring your korban olah, right? You can't just bring a korban olah and go, it's not a problem. V'deikachu, if you've done tshuva, hatanya, we learned in a brisa, avar al mitzvah aseh, if you did not do a mitzvah, a positive commandment, the shav v'lozoz misham, and then you have done tshuva, you have not moved from there ad shemochlim lo, you're forgiven immediately. You don't need a korban at all. So then which is it? If you didn't do tshuva, the korban's not going to help you. If you did do tshuva, you don't need a korban. So what's the point? Ela shmamina dornu. That's what we mean. It's a present, right? Your tshuva is accepted. Now you're just saying, thank you, Hashem, and here's my offering to apologize. It's my thank you gift.
I don't think it's good enough.
Right, well, it is.
That time we've been talking about how Ola is lachaper.
Right. Now we're clarifying. Right? But either this is a clarification or somebody disagrees, but it's not really mechaper, right? Okay, Tanya Nami Yochiv, Rice says like this over. Amar Shimon says, Chatos lama ba. Why does a korban chatos brought? Lama ba, what do you mean? What is it brought for the chaper? It's an atonement. Ella lama ba lifnei ola. So why is it that you bring your korban chatos? You have to bring both. Why does your chatos come first? The answer is lepraklit shenichnas ritza praklit nichnas doran achrov. The answer is if you have a prosecution, right? Let's say you have a case, right? First, you send your defense attorney in first. Once you get off, then you go in afterwards and you present the flowers to the judge saying thank you, right? You don't walk in with your present first.
You don't suck up to a judge.
Right, not good, right? Get off the crime first. Right. Take care of the crime first, then you can bring presents. The exception to the rule, if you have the wrong korban in mind, by the korban pesach and the korban chatos, right? So then that's not going to; those are not valid. Pesach minolan. How do I know that the korban pesach, right, changing it to another korban ruins it? The pasuk says, "Shamor es chodesh ha'aviv v'asisa pesach." You should guard the spring months and make korban pesach. Sheyehu kol asiyosov l'shem pesach. It must be, in order for it to be a korban pesach, must be done l'shem pesach. Ashkechon shini kodesh, so that means you can't change it to another offering. Shini bali minalan, how do I know? I also can't change its owners. The pasuk says, "V'amartem zevach pesachu." We said this is a korban pesach, a sacrifice of a pesach. Shetehei zevicha l'shem pesach, which means the slaughtering must be for the sake of a pesach. Well, Imeno inyan l'shine kodesh. We already just said it has to be for the sake of a korban pesach. Why are we repeating that issue again? Teneo inyan l'shinui balin. We're going to say that pasuk must be telling you cannot change it to another owner. Ashkechan lemitzvah. Now we have this rule that if you say it one time, it means that ideally you should, but if you don't, it's still kosher. So la'akev minolan. So where's another pasuk? We need another pasuk to prove that if it says it again, then we know it's going to be prohibited. So Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'zavachta Pesach laHashem Elokecha." You shall slaughter it as a korban Pesach to Hashem your God. There it is again. It's got to be sacrificed as a Pesach. If it's not, so the Torah is now said it 3 times. One time for the change of korban, one time change of owner, one time to tell me that those things changes are ruining it. So you can't do it at all. Okay. Maskif law Rav Safra. Rav Safra asked a fun question. The high v'zavachta lahachihu da'asa. Is that what that pasuk v'zavachta comes for? I already used that pasuk. Can't use that pasuk for that. High mi b'ilei lich Rav Nachman. We already used that pasuk. Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman says, Amar Rabba Baravua minayin lemoser pesach shekarav shlomim. How do I know that if I have an extra korban pesach, how do you have an extra korban pesach? I separated out one animal. I couldn't find it, so I separated out a second animal, and then I find my first one. So I bring my first one. Now I've got this extra one. What do I do with my extra one?
Wouldn't the second one be invalid?
It is not valid as a Pesach. What is it valid for? It's valid as a Korban Shlomim, right? A Korban Pesach and a Korban Shlomim, right? That's it. So you change your extra, it goes to a Korban Shlomim. How do I know that? Shneimar, because the pasuk says, "V'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem Elokecha tzon ubakar," right? You should slaughter your Korban Pesach to Hashem as either a sheep or a cattle. V'alo ein Pesach ba'el min ha'kvasim min ha'izim. You can't bring a cow as your korban. You can't bring that because a korban pesach is always a small animal. It's either sheep or goat. So how are you saying that you're supposed to slaughter your korban pesach as a large animal?
Isn't a cattle a baby cow? And the baby cow is small enough.
A calf is a baby cow, right? Calf is a baby cow.
Calf is small enough to be a korban because
you can't bring that. It's only a korban pesach has to be a sheep or a goat. And this pasuk seems to imply that it can be a calf as well, and it cannot. So mikan lemoser pesach sheyehei ledavar haba min hatzonu min habakar. Therefore, this is telling us, you know what your korban pesach can be brought for? It can be brought as another type of korban, which can be brought as either a small or a large animal. And umayni, what type of korban can either be brought as a small or large animal? Shlomim. Korban Shlomim. So that's what happened. That's what this pasuk is telling me. So now, if that pasuk is telling me something else, it's not extra, and I cannot use it to teach me that it ruins that changing the ownership or changing the type of korban for a korban pesach is going to ruin the korban. El Amar Rav Safra. So Rav Safra says v'zavach the pesach l'chid Rav Nachman. So you're right. It says v'zavach the pesach. That's what Rav Nachman said. Shamor chodesh haviv lemitzvah. So guard the month. That is the mitzvah. Beshinui Kodesh. Now, V'amartim Zevach Pesach Beshinui Baalim LeMitzvah. That's the pasuk again. We said was changing the owner. That's the mitzvah. Hol Akev. So how do I know that it's going to also ruin it? Bein Hacha in both cases. V'ashkechon Zvicha. Shar Avod. What did I do? Sorry. V'amartim Zevach Pesach Beshinui Baalim LeMitzvah. Who? I'm sorry. That's the next Beshinui Mitzvah. Who, the word who, is la'akev bein hacha v'hacha. The word extra word who is to tell me that it is going to be ma'akev in both. That's our extra pasuk, right? That pasuk is that word extra word who is not necessary.
That's not an extra pasuk, but it's just one word.
It is one word, right? So. Right, that's by the continuing. V'amartim zevach pesach hu. V'amartim zevach pesach, that is the mitzvah. Who is la'akev? Right, we've done that before, where we've taken each of these psukim and we've carved them up and used one part of the pasuk for one drush, one part of the. So that shouldn't shock us. We've done this before.
But not to this extent. Now you're saying that you have this whole concept throughout Zevachim that la'akev is to for an extra pasuk.
Yes.
Now you're just saying one
extra word. Yes, that's a drush. That's correct. That's good. Well, now it doesn't. Now he's only on Daf Zion. He wasn't that. If he had gotten to Daf Kuf Zion, and then that would have shocked him, right? Okay. Bein hacha. So now, the Ashkechon Zvicha. Now, the only of the services that we have now learned will be ruined, that will ruin, is if I slaughter it, not for the sake of the korban, not for the sake of the person. Because that says Zevach Pesach. So we've done this process before. Shar Avodos Minon, what about the other parts of the service? So the answer is Hol V'Guli. Once the Torah, we already know from other places that there's no distinction between intentions from the different services. We've already gone through this. Therefore, once the Torah tells us that by Korban Pesach, that it ruins it, then we're just going to say that's going to be the same rules by all four of them. That's right? That's very nice.
That just ruined my life. That just ruined my life.
That's good.
Yeah, it's like enough.
Okay. Ravashi says, Ho V'Guli lo aminon. We can't say that, right? That's not because look, we went through the whole process before. We said maybe there are differences. He's not thrilled with that answer. Ella avodos minolan. Where's the other services? Where are we going to learn those from? So he says, Dichsiv, the pasuk says, Zos HaTorah le'olah v'lamincha, right? We're going to learn it from this pasuk that says we're going to compare all of these together, right? Vitanya, we learned in a brisa, b'yom tzavosos b'nei Yisrael lahakriv es korbanehem, right? On the day that you command Bnei Yisrael in order to bring their offerings, ze bechor u'maser v'pesach. So that means that next pasuk, that pasuk Zostor le'olav v'lamincha v'lechatos, doesn't mention Korban Pesach in that list. The next pasuk, which says B'yom Tzavoso es Bnei Yisrael akrivas korbanehim, they have to bring their korbanos. What are their korbanos that weren't included in the pasuk before? That's going to include the Bechor, the Meiser, the Pesach, these other offerings as well. So now Hekishu hakasav l'shlomim. Now all of the korbanos, including the Korban Pesach, the Bechor, and the Shlomim, everything's all now connected back to the Shlomim. Ma shlomim bein shinui kodesh bein shinui balin ba'inan lemitzvah. So, just like we said before, that by the shlomim, that if you don't have the proper intention, either for the right korban or for the right person, that's going to invalidate, that's going to still keep the korban validated still, but for the mitzvah, for the sake of the owner, it will not count. Af kol bein shinui kodesh bein shinui balin mitzvah. Therefore, as we said, all of these korbanos, we already know. That's the rule. We already know the rule by all of the korbanos, that they all need to have, right? We don't need a pasuk, special pasuk by a Korban Pesach to tell us that there's a mitzvah to bring it for the sake of the owner, because we're compared it to shlomim. Okay, shlomim. So now we're going to say it's like shlomim. Ma shlomim bein zvicha bein shar avodos lo chalakta behen lemitzvah. Just like we said by the Korban shlomim, that slaughtering it and sprinkling the blood and catching the blood, there's no difference between the level of invalidation in any of those services. So therefore, af Pesach lo tachlok bein zvicha l'shar avodos la'akev. So now, once we learned that by slaughtering it by Korban Pesach, there's no difference, we're going to say it works. Essentially, he's saying that whole of a gully, but with a pasuk, right? Once the pasuk tells us that all of the services are equivalent when it comes to a shlomim, that's now the rule by all of these sacrifices.
The pasuk also told it wasn't just shlomim that first pasuk; it was about all the karbanos.
But remember that with the source for what was being withheld is shlomim, right? You can't go back to chatos and say, well, chatos is different between shechting and kabbalah, because we didn't have psukim by that. All of the other korbanos don't have enough psukim. We always had to go back to the shlomim to prove it. So therefore, we're always going back to the shlomim. Ella hu lamali. Okay, well, now according to his drasha, I don't even need the word who, right? Because I already knew from the shlomim that there was a mitzvah. Those extra psukim were enough to tell me that it's going to cause the offering to be invalidated completely.
So basically, who is an add-on? Is an extra word.
I don't need it. So what do I do with it? Kedetanya, we need the who according to this brisa. So we're going to use it here. Nemar b'Pesach hu b'shchita la'akev. Aval osham lo nemar bahu ela le'akar tars emurin. So he says that we're going to point out that when the word who is written by the Korban Pesach, it's written by the slaughtering, in order to indicate that unlike the Korban Osham, where the word who is written after all of the fats are being burned on the Mizbeach, that the only time the word who has any meaning and significance is when it's written by the services themselves that are critical. Because remember, we had worried about the Korban Osham. We said, well, is it like the Chatos? It says who. The answer is no. Only if you use the word who, like you do in Korban Pesach, then it's going to invalidate the offering. Not if you use it by burning the by a later part of the service, which is not required, right? Vehu atzmo shelo hukchuru emurav kosher. And why is the point of that who? Why is Osham say vehu? The answer is that if you burn those fats, right? That even if you don't bring those at all, the korban is kosher, right? Meaning, this is an Osham, and burn the fats. Okay, meaning, whether you burn the fats, you don't burn the fats, the Osham is done, it's finished, completed. Also burn the fats, right? That's the point of that pasuk. Okay, so that's how we learn by korban. Now we've completed all of the korbanos, and we've completed Korban Pesach. Next on our list is the Korban Chatos. We've got to figure out where's the source for the Korban Chatos to invalidate the offering completely. Chatos min nolan. What's the source for the Korban Chatos? Dechsiv, the pasuk says, "V'shachat osol lechatos." You shall slaughter it as a chatos. Shetehei shchita l'shem chatos, which we said, I think we quoted this before. The slaughtering of this sin offering has to be for a sin offering. Ashkan shchita. So that means that shchita has to be for a chatos. Kabbalah min nolan. What about catching the blood? Dechsiv, the pasuk says, V'lakacha kohen midama chatos. The kohen shall take from the blood of the korban chatos. Shetehei kabbalah l'shem chatos. There, now we're going through each of the avodos by the chatos. Interestingly, right? Not like what we did by the korban pesach. The catching of the blood has to be for a chatos. V'ashkechon shchita v'kabbalah. So I have now slaughtering it and catching the blood. Zerika minol. And what's the source for sprinkling the blood? Damar cross. The pasuk says, "V'chiper alav hakohen mechatos." So the kohen shall atone for his sin. Atonement is sprinkling the blood. Shtei kapara l'shem chatos. Right? The atonement. And we said the final part of the process, sprinkling the blood, that's the atonement. Ashkechon shinei kodesh. So now we've got all the psukim that we need in order to tell me that changing for the sake of the owner is going to ruin the offering. Shinoi ba'alamino. And what about the change of the sacrifices? What about change of the owner? Amar Kol, the pasuk says, alav, right? V'chiper alav, we said before, alav v'lo al chavero. It has to be his, not for his friend. Although we did mention just before that his friend has to also be somebody who's chayav a korban chatos. Ashkechon lemitzvah. So now that tells me only by the mitzvah, because each of those only had one pasuk. La'akev minolan. How do I know that this is going to hold it back from being valid at all? Kedama Rav Huna, brother of Yeshua. Like Rav Huna says to Rav Yeshua, chatos, chatoso. So he says that you've got an extra vav there. The extra vav, now you're going to get an extra letter. If you did before, extra word, now you're going an extra letter, right? That the Kohen is going to bring his chatos and his ola. That's what's talking about. So he says, therefore, he learns that you can learn an extra drush from the extra vav. That's by the chatos nozir. Right, and so here too, right? So we're going to say this also. Chatoso. So the extra vav means that the shinui balim shinui. We have the change in the owner also is going to ruin the offering.
It's crazy that the Gemara can't find one other place where it says chatas. It must say 1,000 times.
Chataso. There's like 2 places in the entire place.
No, where it says chatas or chatas in the Torah. You're just looking for another word like that. I don't know exactly how all these drushes work, but
I know that's the truth about it, right? That there has no other place where.
Ask me a local Orthodox rabbi or rab.
So the I always am looking through this, going. I'm presuming they're catching each of the extra versions, but yes.
Yeah, hoping someone's on top of it.
So we'll have to. Yeah, as I said, it would be prudent to review Vayikra in great detail.
Yeah.
In order to be able to know the answer to that question. I have not. Okay. Now, Bishinui Kodesh Uzrika, Bishinui Balim. So what we've got is, okay, Ashechan Mitzvah. So we've got now by a mitzvah, by Shinui Kodesh, by changing, right? There's a mitzvah, you can't change it to another. When we say mitzvah, it means that if you did it, it's going to ruin it for that person, but it's not going to ruin the offering, so bring the offering. We've done that by changing it from one offering to another. And Zrikoi Bishinui Balim, Bein Mitzvah, Bein Lakiv. And as far as sprinkling it, now we've already said that if you change it for the owner, that's going to ruin it both for the owner and for, and all together. La'ake b'chol avodos b'shinui kodesh u'b'shar avodos b'shinui balim bein lemitzvah bein la'akev minol. And how are we going to learn all the other services and all the other intents? Amar Rav Yonah asya mechatos nazir. The answer is we're going to learn it from chatos nazir, from the sin offering of the nazir. The pasuk says by the nazir. V'yikriva kohen lifnei Hashem. They bring this korban close to Hashem. V'asas chataso, and he will make his chatos. V'as olaso, and his ola.
His sin was he drank wine and he cut his hair, right? Those were his sins for Nazir?
This is the end of his Nazir offering. There's a question whether he has an Aveira at all, right? That korban, that's discussed in Masechus Nazir, whether he's done an Aveira. Why is he bringing a chatas if he doesn't? If he hasn't done, is his Aveira that he didn't drink wine, or is his rather than he did drink wine? But this is at the end of his Naziros that he was successful at. Then he would bring it because he restrained himself from enjoying the world, or whether, right, or whether the Avera is that he's stopping from being on a higher level of Kedusha, but those are explanations as to why it's a Chatos. But in any event, he's bringing his Chatos in his Olash. Yikol Asiyosav L'Shem Chatos. So that means that it says Es Chataso, all of his actions have to be for the sake of a Chatos. And now if a Korban Chatos by a Nazir means that you need to have it, and I've got this extra one, so therefore I've got, that means I have to now learn that to all other korban chatos in the same way. and they are also going to need to be done for the sake of the right offering. So Ashkelon Shinoi Kodesh. So now I've got the extra pasuk by Shinoi Kodesh, by changing the offering. Shinoi Balam et Minoa, and I still need psukim for the wrong intent, for the wrong owner on the other parts of the service. So the answer is, do we read that parentheses? No, we're going to skip that. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yeshua. Rav Huna says, Rav Yeshua, Chatos Chatoso. That's where we're going to have this extra word, Chatos. This is by, this Chatos Chatoso is the one we quoted before. Right? It has to be for his sake. Right? So this pasuk is now telling us that his offering has to be for his sake. So therefore, if he changes it for a different owner, it's going to invalidate the offering altogether. Okay, so the problem with that is, as you said, if I go through the psukim, then every time it has an extra vav, it should tell me that it must be for the sake of that person. Is that what we're saying? So maskif lo Ravina says, al mi'ativ, that's true. Olas olaso, my drosh tebe. What do you do with the extra vav in olas? And it says, he says you're supposed to bring his chatos, which we now have interpreted means you can't switch it to any other thing. So then what do you do with his ola? Okay, Ula Ravina, minchas minchaso. We've got other places. The mincha, his mincha, and then it says his mincha. What about that? Nesach nischo, my drosh. What about nesach, his nesach? Every time it says of extra vav means that it needs to be for the sake of the owner. So,
And it says that 100 times.
seems they're quoting him, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Someone's been counting.
Sahumi boile minchasam veniskehem. Balayla minchasam veniskehem afilu lemachar. He says that this drasha, right, this pasuk is minchaso and venisko, that didn't bother Ravina because he says that vav is coming to tell us the drasha of the korbanos of Sukkos, which that they can be brought even at night. Because it says minchasam v'niskehem, afilu lemachar, and even the next day.
But I thought you're supposed to bring the carbon during that same day. And
Yes, that's
if Tuesday because the night before, why did you bring?
well. The nighttime is never a time for korbanos. Hang on a second. Yesha krobos a korban, minchas nazir nechas of Hashem cravim.
Why was this one an exception?
Afilu balaylov, afilu machar sakrovos korbanosov. Yeah.
Why was this one an exception then?
Because pasuk says. Right, pasuk says with a vav at the end to tell us that's an exception. I'm not sure if that means that it's karosh and it's kemshin or parechag shem kravim. Yeah, we'll see that on Pei Daled. What is the rule there?
Does that mean it can be eaten? It's not eaten, right? It's like a korban tzibur. It's not eaten.
The korban mincha, yeah, it's a korban tzibur there, which means that it is not shem parechag shem kravim afilu belayla shem kravim afilu lemachar. It's you're burning the mincha and the nesachim. You're not bringing the korban, the blood services, which cannot be burned at night. You're just burning the mincha and the fats on the mizbeach at night. That's what it's coming to include, right? Minchasam v'niskehem. So he says nisko. So that's the purpose of that extra vav, is in order to tell me that point. But if that's the point of the vav, and we'll see that drasha when we get to Pei Daled, we'll see that in detail. So we still are stuck. El olas olaso my darash tabu. We're still stuck with that extra vav. V'tu, and furthermore, migmiri mehadadi. Can you learn one korban chatos from another korban chatos? Right, because chatas chelev mechatas nazir lo gamra. Because you can't learn a korban chatos, which an individual would bring for doing an Aveira, from a korban chatos that a person would bring for being a Nazir, because shekain yesh imadamim acherim, because the korban Nazir comes with other sacrifices together. It's a different circumstance. You can't say chatos is chatos. Not true. Chatos, each korban chatos has different rules. So the answer is chatas nazir me chatas chelev lo gemara, and you can't learn a chatas nazir from a korban chatas of the chelev and say that one. Why? Shekain kares, because one has an atonement for averos that have kares penalties, right? Or regular individuals, whereas a korban chatas of a nazir is not nearly as strong. It doesn't bring you, you're not atoning for a real serious avera there. So therefore, those two korban chatas, you can't bring any connections. Elamar Rava. So Rava says, forget the korban chatas of the nazir. Asyame chatas mitzora. Let's go over to the mitzora, the chatas, the korban sin offering that a person who has tzaras brings. Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, v'asa kohen as a chatos. Right, the kohen should make it as a chatos. Shekol as yosef l'shem chatos. Now we've got an extra pasuk tells us that all of the services must be done for the sake of a chatos. V'ashkechon shine kodesh. So now we know that changing the holiness of the item from one kedusha of one korban to the other is going to ruin it. Shine ba'am minalei. Where's the source for the change of owners? Amar Kro, the pasuk says, v'chiper al hamitaher. It shall atone for the person who's being purified. Al hamitaher zeh. It's going to atone. This korban for mitzora has to be for this person who has tzaras, not for the other guy. Ve'akasi, still, you were waiting for that, right? This is good. You're getting the hang of what's going on, right? You still can't. You can't learn how you're going to compare korban of. And you already still know that we're going to go lower izek karizek coming up, right? So you're starting to get the hang, right? It's good. You're seeing the flow of here, right? Can't learn this korban chatas from the other one. Chatas chaylev mechatas mitzvah lo yalfa. You can't learn a korban chatas that's brought for an individual for chaylev for somebody who has tzaras. Shekain yesh ima damim acherim, because there are other sacrifices that come with that one too. Chatas mitzvah mechatas chaylev lo. You can't learn from the person in mitzvah because also shekain kares. Right? So the answer is mechad law. So you can't learn one from the other, right? Okay, but teisi chada mitarsi. But now it's written in all three places. So therefore, 2 out of the 3 should be sufficient to prove the third one, which makes the third one extra, right? So teisi chada mitarti, b'hai lo lichtov. Okay, which one are you going to leave out? How are you going to learn? Which one are you going to learn from which one? Lo lichtav rachmana v'chatas chaylev. You're going to leave out the one by the sin offering, where the person who brings an atonement for his personal aveira of eating chaylev, v'teisei mehanach, and you're going to learn it from the other two, from the chatas tzras and the chatas of nazir. Malahanach shekein yesh imaim dam macher. Both of those are coming with other sacrifices. Lo lichtav rachmana v'chatas nazir. You're going to tell me not to include the chatas nazir, v'teisei mehanach. You're going to learn from the mitzora and the personal the personal chatas. Malahanach shekein ein lahen she'ela. He says, well, Nazir, and he says, Nazir is the result of you taking an oath. You can get out of being a Nazir by going to a Chacham and asking for your oath to be revoked. That you can't do that by Tzaras or doing an Aveira. You can't revoke your Korban Chatas obligation by asking a Chacham. Lo lichtav rachman v'chatas mitzora. Which one are you going to leave out? The one by the mitzora. V'teisei mihanach, and learn from the other two. Malahanach shekain ein ba'in bedalus. The other ones don't have levels, right? We know that by the mitzora, there are levels to that korban. It depends on how rich you are, which one you bring. Ella amar kra. So the pasuk says, okay, so you can't learn any of them from any of them. We scrapped the whole half a page. The pasuk says, Zos HaTorah. This is where we were waiting. Why didn't we start with this? We just went other way first. The pasuk says, Zos HaTorah la'olav v'la mincha. Hekeshu hakasav l'shlamim. The korban chatos is now compared to the shlamim. Ma shlamim bein shinui kodesh bein shinui ba'alim ba'inon lishman lemitzvah. Just like we said by the korban shlamim, all of the services have to be done for the sake of the mitzvah. Avchatos bein shinei kodesh bein shinei balim ba'in lemitzvah. So therefore, korban chatos, all of the services have to be done, whether it's shinei balim, change of owner, change of sacrifice. They have to be done for the sake of in order they have to be done lishma for the sake if it's going to count for the owner. Hilkach mitzvah mishlamim. So therefore, the mitzvah says from Shlamim, Vehanach kroi, and all of those psukim that we quoted by the Korban Chatos, that's le'akev. That's what tells me that it's critical. So let's stop there. Right, we're going to get into the end today. We'll stop here. We will pick up with right. Ve'ashkechan chatas chelav. Right, we'll pick up with. Basically, what we've done is just to make sure we understand what we've done to stop here is we can't learn any of the sin offerings from each other. We've decided they're all separated. we now know that the individual korban chatos is compared to all of the other korbanos. Therefore, that's going to be the one where we've got these extra psukim, and that's going to be the one that now tells us that if you do it for the wrong intent, the whole korban is ruined. Now we got to go back to the Metzora, the Nazir, those sin offerings, and say, how do we know that those are also invalidated? Because you can't learn it from a chaylev. Chatas chayv you can't learn it from, because we said they're not similar. So that's going to be the next step.
That's where we're going to make the mamatzinu.